Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It's nice to be here. I don't get to come back into Bristol often, so it's a nice treat. I worked here and lived here for years, but the fine guys at Arbon, where we created lots of fun Flash stuff, but that ended a few years ago when I left to form my own company specialised in making HTML5 games. And because it was so early on in the existence of doing HTML5 games, we needed a framework in which to do it because nothing existed. There was nothing open source. There was just a couple of commercial things or a few hobby projects. So created Phaser, which is basically what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. So the contents is very brief. I'm going to split it into three sections. So the first bit is what is Phaser. I mean, you've probably got quite a good idea. Can I just get a quick show of hands who's actually used Phaser before, even just to mess around with? Probably about half of you. Keep your hands up if you've used it in anger, like you really kind of have created something and released something with it. Great, right, for you guys, the future of Phaser is the bit that you've come for, okay? The rest of it you'll understand. But basically, Phaser, so I'm going to cover what it is, a brief history of why you bothered to make it in the first place, how it works, so I'll run through some code examples, nothing particularly in depth, but just something that shows kind of how the API is structured. Some game examples as well, so to show what game developers have made with it, the future of it, so where I'm taking it at the moment, and the challenge of running an open source project as big as Phaser, which I thought might be quite an interesting side to, because it's just grown beyond belief, so the issues around that. So, what is it? It's an HTML5 game framework. So fundamentally it sits on top of a canvas tag. Canvas is the root of all of it. It creates a 2D canvas context. If the browser supports it, it creates a WebGL one, which gives you GPU acceleration so it can do things faster and more natively. But fundamentally everything happens on top of that. So it's kind of like an interface between canvas and WebGL and your game. It's a JavaScript API, it's written in ES5 at the moment, and there are TypeScript bindings available as well if you're kind of like of the Microsoft persuasion. Also, as well as using the Canvas and WebGL API, it makes use of all of these web APIs as well. So, web audio for handling audio with forwarding back to audio tag, a full screen API, gamepad API for sticking your PS4 controller in, XHR for asset loading. So there's a whole raft of web technologies that kind of sit on the bottom layer. Phaser sits on the top of them basically, and it kind of like it handles all of the interface between the two. But obviously it doesn't just do that. It's not just like an abstraction there, because that's just kind of how to get stuff input and get stuff output again. It also provides game level functions on top of it. So I kind of like to think of it as kind of like building a burger, basically. So these are just some of the things that Phaser as an API offers. So at the very base level, you've got asset loading. So the ability to load in PNGs, sprite sheets, text atlases, videos, sound files. That handles all of it in parallel. The issues with cores, the issues with kind of like cross-site stuff. So that kind of sits at the bottom and that gets everything in there. So there's a loader API that interfaces with that. On top of that, you've got audio. I kind of stopped that as the cheese because audio in HTML5 has been cheesy for so long. But basically until they released web audio anyway. So it abstracts away the complexities with audio. So web audio for a modern browser will basically give you, fine-grained per millisecond control of playing back audio the way it should be done, falling back to audio tags, which is like the bane of everyone's life, for older browsers, so sort of IE9. But basically the whole point of Phaser is that you create a Phaser sound object, you say, right, here's my MP3 file, play it, or loop it, or repeat it, or play this bit of it, and it does it, and you don't care about which one is picked underneath. It will always try and pick the most powerful route, so it will always try and pick WebGL, it will always try and pick web audio, but it will fall back if it can't do that, and there are lots of environments where that isn't available. Then you've got physics systems as well. There are actually multiple physics systems built into Phaser. There's arcade physics, which is kind of like basic rectangles and circle collision. It's computationally really cheap, so it works great on mobile. It doesn't require much kind of like to understand. It's very fundamentally basic. It's kind of velocity and gravity and collision between objects and overlapping between objects. So that is kind of, it works great on mobile, so a lot of people stick with it. But it's also not enough. So there's also P2 physics, which is like a full body physics system as well. It's a third-party library. But Phaser kind of like, instead of having to learn a completely new API, like the whole of P2, for example, works in like meters instead of pixels, so it kind of handles away all the abstraction of dealing with that. So you have one common interface regardless of whether you're using Arcade or P2, and it basically kind of just routes it to the library functions and then uses and pulls the data back again. Now obviously, depending on which one you're using, depends on what features you get. So P2 will give you like springs, constraints, and material collisions, and all kinds of stuff that you can think, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I need that because okay, Arcade is basically just a rectangle against a box. So it's another example of just a way in which I thought, right, okay, this works, Arcade works, but it's not enough, so we need to have this feature in there as well. There's also Ninja Physics, which is like a tile-specific physics engine, and I've just been working on Matter.js, which is another physics engine. So fundamentally, you've got 4 different physics systems, and you pick the one that you want to use for your game. You could actually pick 2 in the same game, it works, but I wouldn't pick it. Text, so text, games need text. It has multiple ways of handling text. You can have canvas text, which is using the canvas API to render text. So for fonts loaded in from external sites like Google Fonts, you would need that. Or you can have bitmap level text, whereby you're using an image, which has each of the little characters in it as an actual separate. So like, yeah, basically it's like a sprite sheet with kerning data associated with it. So again, you kind of, it's another example of, right, well, using canvas text isn't always ideal. It's actually, rendering-wise, it's quite slow on mobile, so sometimes it's not the best thing to pick, but other times it's perfect, especially if you want like a foreign character set. Whereas bitmap text is using more memory, uses kind of like textures to handle its rendering, but at the same time, sometimes that's a perfect result as well, because you need just a more beautiful crafted font, so it provides both of those. On top of that, you have input. So input is a huge part of Phaser. You need to be able to play with your game. You need to be able to kind of like touch a touch screen and have something move. You have to drag something. You need to have mouse events picked up and keyboard events picked up and joypad events picked up. So there's an input manager that takes all of that and routes all of the controls through to the various different layers underneath it. So you basically create an input handler on a sprite and you say, right, okay, I want to be able to drag it, and it doesn't care whether you're doing it with a finger on a screen or a mouse on a PC. It's just a drag event as far as you're concerned. On top of that, it's the burger, because it's the most important bit. Sprites and graphics, basically, they are the lifeblood of your game. They're the heart of your game. They're everything visual that appears on screen. A sprite could be anything from a background to a player character to a UI button. They are just everything. So there's a lot of stuff inside Phaser that deals with sprites, the generation of them, the ability to kind of pull them. So if you're creating a game where you want to blast 100 bullets off the screen, you don't want it to sort of like have to create 100 new objects every time you fire. You want them to be intelligently pulled and cached and reused again. So you kind of like just think, oh yeah, I'll pull that out of the pool, and it does that because I started Phaser such a long time ago when mobile devices were just utterly terrible at running HTML5. We needed every last little millisecond we could get, so we were quite sort of aggressive on the caching. On top of that, animation, so sprite sheet animation, texture, axis animation. There are loads of third-party extensions for using Spine and Spriter and bone-based animation systems, which is kind of like exporting a different texture applied to a different piece of an animation, and the animation data is exported out of a third-party app like Adobe Animate. And so basically, the ability to get your sprites moving in a, not just literally animated and moving as well. Tweens, bacon, because everything's better with bacon. They basically polish everything, you tween stuff in, bounce stuff out, fade stuff, make it nice. So there's a whole tween manager and an easing system built in as well. Timers are kind of visually utterly boring, but essential in terms of your game. You need to be able to know when something started, when it ended, trigger an event based on when it ended, trigger another event, repeat something, loop something. So there's a whole set of timer events built in, so there's like a timer API as well that you can kind of create events off of and listen to. Tile maps, so they're kind of like a harking back to the olden days really, where you've got games built up of visual tiles. But we use third-party tools again like Tiled and Mappy, and we import that data natively, so the loader understands these third-party apps, and it takes the data and it will import it, render tile maps for it. Particles, because, well, no one needs an egg in a burger, but it's better with one. You've got the particle system. It's just polish again, isn't it? Make things explode, make smoke fluff up in the air. Just do things nice, make your game look beautiful. round it all off with scaling, because not everyone plays on the same size screen anymore. You know, back in the day, it was an HTML5 game was pretty much just someone sat at a PC bringing up a browser and hitting a website and playing a game. Now they can bring up that game on anything, literally anything, whether it's their fridge or their phone or their smart TV or whatever, and the game needs to render it. I mean, that's kind of the interesting thing. It was kind of touched on in the questions and your talk earlier about what platforms can you take an HTML5 game to. I mean, Phaser is based around a web platform, but the whole meaning of that is quite loose these days. You've got native in the browser, obviously, but you've also got browser-based environments like web views inside native apps. You've got compiled to consoles, compiled to TVs. So as long as it actually runs in a browser, so we focus on the browser side of it, but that in itself, that experience can then be taken in all manner of different places. Now, Phaser doesn't do that for you, so you do need to basically look at something like Cordova or Cocoon and use those to take it and wrap it into a native application, but loads of people do it. I mean, I literally feature a couple of games on the Phaser site every week that are native apps that people have sat down, they've created it, they've tested it in Chrome to death, and then they wrapped it and published it, so it's a very common thing. And that kind of is your kind of a Phaser burger, really. And this is all the game levels, and this isn't even all of it. I just kind of had, I couldn't vertically fit a bigger burger on the screen, so I chopped out a few of the features. But there are more than this, so it's a big API, which in a sense is kind of a double-edged sword, because it's slightly overwhelming in the sense that there's a lot in it, and it's not always obvious where to go to do certain things. But at the same time, I've had loads of developers come to me and say like, oh, I really need to do this in my game, and I found it, and it did it. It was already built in, and or I spent a week trying to add this, but it was already in there as a function. And it was just like, so the way I kind of try and combat that is creating examples, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples on the Phaser website, so you can actually go in and search for something specific and usually find what you're looking for. But the other side effect of having a burger this big is that the package size was quite large as well. So especially when a lot of developers last year came to me saying like, oh, we're making banner ads, so we can't have a 700k JavaScript file. I was like, yeah, I know. So I kind of spent quite a while looking at the build process, and you can basically think, right, well, okay, fine. I don't need any text rendering it in this game at all, because I'm maybe doing it all through images, or it just doesn't have it, or the text is contained in the web page around it, so just take out the salad. You need salad in a burger anyway. So you basically, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, so you can take out the bits that you don't need and crunch it right down. But even so, if you have everything in there, it's still quite a large payload, and that's one of the things that we'll cover kind of in the future of it, because moving to proper ESX modules will let you actually fine-grain pick which bits you want. This will just show what I was talking about here. promo video we put together just to sum up everything I just discussed, really. Why did I build it? Well, as I mentioned previously, because there was nothing else out there that I could use. But also because I needed a way to just kind of keep my own sanity in check, really, because this is just it's basically 2,500 changes to WebKit from every single week. Canary to Chrome in 12 weeks, that's like a feature drop rate, it's just like phenomenal. I basically had kind of like projects in flight that have completely broken halfway through delivery testing phase because they, a browser feature emerged. iOS Android updates over the air. It's just basically, it's a really big shifting quagmire of stuff going on, and it's not going to stop. I mean, I have actually had a slide very similar to this in my talks for the last 4 years now, so that is how it's not going to change. This just, and why should it? I don't want it to change. It's amazing that the web is actually shifting as much as it is. I mean, it's kind of overwhelming, but it's still amazing. But yeah, so I think things that when you start out on a project, especially more long-form projects, ones that have taken like 3, 4, maybe 5 months, not really quick turnaround and a couple of week ones. Right at the very beginning of it, when you're kind of like speccing it out, and you think, oh no, we can't do that, it's not possible. It might well be by the end of it, you just don't know. You have to kind of keep on top of it. And also, yeah, I've got to be prepared to unlearn what you know every 6 months, and I still think that's true. This is as in what is happening on a purely foundational web API level. Because Phaser lives in it and swims and breathes in it, it has to take advantage, it has to use it. So when Canary starts deprecating a certain event, or there's a certain API call and it starts flagging up warnings in the console, we need to adjust Phaser to cope with it, because obviously it will then hit mainstream in a few weeks' time. So it's difficult making HTML5, so I'm not going to lie about it, but at the same time, it's difficult making websites, it's difficult making anything on a platform that shifts as much as it does, and there's no understating how much it shifts. Okay, again, back to why does the API look like it does? And this kind of, unfortunately, I'm old enough to have been around in the era when, I grew up playing games on a Spectrum and I made my own games on like an Atari ST. So right back in the 8 and 16-bit days, and packages that you can see on screen like STOSnet, that's what I learned, that's what I used when I was like really young and loved it. And they were very verbose. The kind of the language you've got on there, like flash off and hide, it's detailed, it's wordy, but it makes sense. It's kind of like you can read it. If you can read a bit of code and it reads like a book, then you've probably written it in the right way. And I kind of took that and I used that in Phaser everywhere. I basically built the entire framework around that. It has to be obvious what is going on by reading the function, or the function and the manager together. And if it isn't, then I kind of usually go back and change it until it is. And I think it's worked, because loads of people use it now, like literally tens of thousands of developers, and none of them have ever complained and said, oh, actually, no, sorry, I didn't understand what that function did once they get into it. The easiest way to explain, or is to show you, so I'm going to go through a bit of Phaser code now. I switch to Sublime and hope this doesn't crash. There we go. Right, so you kind of saw this briefly in the previous talk. So I took the most fundamentally basic, simple example I could think of. So it's instantiating a new Phaser game. It's got some dimensions at the top. Auto is basically saying, right, give me a renderer, whatever you can manage. Phaser example is actually just an ID of a div tag to inject the canvas into, and then the following little object here is the state. So it's basically saying, I've got states, game state. So Phaser basically operates running one game state at once. So there are certain predefined, like hard-coded words that you could use in your state, or functions. You can name the functions. So preload is one. So it will look for a preload in your object. It will basically think, right, I'll execute that. So in this example here, you can see it's loading an image. And then once it's done that, it will then move on to create, which is basically create everything. So it's just run once, and then beyond that, it will run into an update cycle. And there are a lot of other things that a game state can have, but at its absolute basic, this is what it is. So as you can see, this literally, it loads an image, and then it creates a sprite, 0, 0, the coordinates of it, and strangely enough, if we run it, Einstein. So I mean, it's it's not exactly stunning, but at least at the same time, it's that's fundamentally that's what 3 lines of code. But it goes obviously much further than that. So let's take the same example as I just got, and at the moment this time I'm changing it ever so slightly, so it's actually going to center it, so it'll be centered in the middle of the game window, and I'm going to enable it for input. So that literally is a case of basically specifying input enabled as true on your object, and then once you've done that, you can then.
Could you make the text bigger? Thank you.
Better? Has it gone off the edge now? No. So, So basically, once it's enabled for input, you can then listen to all sorts of events, so drag events, click events, and on here I've got a input down event, so when you click it, it will change the texture. So this one. Alright, so the first one, we click it, and there you go.
Oh.
Right, I mean, it might not scare Nintendo, it might scare a few Democrats, but it's not going to scare Nintendo. But it's still, you can kind of see that the building blocks are starting to kind of form now. So we wanted something a little bit further than this. Essentially, it's the same kind of thing. So this actually is setting a background color for my game. And then we're going to create some text objects. So it's basically game.add.text. The 62 pixel Arial black, you can guess straight away what it's going to do. I don't think there's any sort of ambiguity there. It's got a fill color, it's got a shadow, it's got a bit of thickness. The difference this time is that I've enabled them for physics. So the actual objects here now have physics bodies, which means you can give them velocity, you can set them to collide and bounce around. So, get rid of it. Literally. And so basically you've got two, these are canvas text objects, enabled with a bit of physics, so they just bounce around your game. Now, again, it's a kind of like, it's not, the point isn't really to sort of like show that the point is to show that these are building blocks. Games are fundamentally just comprised of input and a bit of logic. So this is kind of like the creation phase, of creating all your objects, adding a bit of styling to them, and then sort of unleashing them into the world. And we can take that further as well. So here we go down. Basically, I'm creating, weapon is a plugin that's built into Phase that allows you to create weapons, basically. Shooting stuff, shooting bullets. Lots of games involve shooting. I like shooting things. So I kind of added it in because I saw a lot of people on the forums struggling because they were coming up with the same problem time and time again. They were like, okay, how do I get my bullets flying up the screen? How do I make sure that they kill themselves once they leave the top of it? How do I recycle them? How can I set physics on them? So I thought, fine, well, let's do that. So, so we literally have a little spaceship firing bullets, and they go all over the place, which is what you would hope they would do. And fundamentally, if you look in the update, this basically is the bit that runs consistently time and time again. So all it's literally doing is checking if my up arrow key is pressed, and if it is, it sets a bit of acceleration based on the direction that the spaceship was pointing. And if I'm not pressing up, it just cancels the acceleration and stops it from moving. If you press left, it makes it spin to the left, press right, spins to the right. And if I press the fire button, which is the space bar in this case, it fires a bullet. And, oh yeah, and the wrap makes it wrap around the edge of the screen when you hit the edges. So it's like, these again, more building blocks. It's kind of, I guess, like a giant Lego set in a way. You kind of like think, okay, right, well, I'm going to make a shooter, or I can take the weapons API and I can kind of like bolt it onto the bit that I'm working on. And then you can think, right, well, I've got the images and I know how to enable clicking input on them and I can drag them. And you just kind of keep taking bits and bits and bits and bits and bits, and you can slowly build them up and create games at the end of it. I have another example which is a bit more complicated, but fundamentally, because we use WebGL when the browser supports it, we can do WebGL effects, so we can do shader effects and we can use batch textures, but basically it means that we can do nicer things in the browser. So this was a shader. Shaders are written in the GLSL, and there are loads, thousands and thousands of them out there, and fundamentally they're just text. It's just like a little bit of machine code. So, but the important bit isn't really the shader. It's not what it's doing. It's how you actually use it. So you create a phaser filter, you give it a size, and then you just sign it. So sprite.filter equals filter. That is literally it. That basically takes that entire shader, all of it, sets it on the sprite, and does it. And if we run it. You're thankful I didn't do that with Donald Trump. So basically, shaders let you do a lot of stuff. They're much more high level, they're much more low level, so they're more complicated to create. But the process of actually getting them into your game and using them isn't complicated, and that was the bit that I was concerned of, because I can't make them easier to write. There are lots of books and tutorials and tools out there that do that, but to make them easy to use in Phaser, that was what I wanted to achieve. So hence this. And the very last thing here, if I have a quick look at this. Phaser also uses a lot of plugins, so there are loads and loads of plugins that the community release, and there are plugins that I release, there are commercial plugins that I release, and actually the money that I get from them directly funds its development, so, and I'll cover that under the open source bit later on, but I just wanted to show an example of one of them. So we basically, up here, this really is kind of this little bit here in the loader. Again, this is just like another tiny, tiny example of how I was just kind of like, oh, well, you know, I could do game.load.image, red.png, blue, line. But I thought, well, no, actually, if I've got all these images in one folder and they're all named like this and they're all PNG files, then you can just specify the keys and that's it. Give it an array, bang, it loads them all, it does them all in parallel, it brings them in. So it was just kind of like, it's a little example of a tiny tweak to the loader that just makes you have to write less code. And writing less code makes you make stuff faster and you can iterate and test faster. So then I'm just installing a plugin here. And if I can figure it out quickly. Alright, okay, so we've got tiny little, it's just a particle plugin, it's just creating a little particle effect. But you can do a lot of stuff with it. So if I enable a gravity well, and then reload, and you can see it's slightly being pulled over here. Actually, if I enable another one and reload it again, now you can see it being slightly pulled over here, and the particle is slightly pulled to the side. And if I enable another one, oh, actually, no, that was. And now they're all kind of getting swirled around down there, but I think, okay, no, actually I want to stick it to the mouse pointer. So input.x, input.y, that basically normalizes the input no matter whether you're using a mouse or a touch screen. And then now you can kind of just drag them around and they'll get slowly pulled into the little gravity wells that have been set around the screen. And although this kind of like, you know, obviously this bit here clearly isn't a game, there are loads of games, as I'll kind of show you in a second when we do some game examples, that use little effects like this, like on the menu systems or on the, you know, kind of like level select screens, or just stuff to enhance what's going on. And so that's sort of basically, it was just kind of like a quick example of how to create, and literally create, I mean, those are just coordinates. I was saying just put a gravity well there, that's just a bit of strength to it. So and this is just one plugin of one of the layers of that huge burger that you saw basically. So yeah, there is a lot, but at the same time, once you dig into it, you can do a lot with it as well. If I just close that, because it might actually start. Okay, so like I said, I wanted to show off a few games. These are not games that I've made, these are games made by other studios out there. But I think, and they're quite recent ones as well, and I think they serve as a good sort of indication of the level that you can get to. So these guys have basically made these games using exactly the same building blocks that are available to everyone that was shown in all those little examples that I just went through. So it's not like they've done anything additionally. You know, they've got great artists, obviously, but fundamentally they're still using exactly the same tools. So I probably, because PowerPoint on the Mac doesn't show YouTube inline for some reason, so if I switch out, I can show you a trailer for it. But Tetris, I mean, it's okay, so it's a nice, polished example, but it's still an example of an HTML5 game that Cool Games created. And they basically operate portals, gaming portals. So kind of like back in the Flash heyday, lots of kids would go to congregate on Newgrounds. That's evolved, and it's now mostly, those kind of games portals are now mostly run by like telco operators, and Core Games are a studio that produce masses of content that feed into all of these portals. So Tetris Twist is kind of like playable on phone devices, and it's not in app stores. It's basically running on kind of like proper browser-based gaming. So you can go to a browser-based gaming portal on your phone or tablet, and you can play Tetris Twist. So it's kind of this is a huge, quite big area of HTML5 gaming. Is like telecom operator games portals. This was the YouTube video that does play on a PC but not on a Mac. Okay, and this is another one. So Nearwood is basically kind of like a hidden object adventure game. It's a very casual game, but it's utterly beautiful game. And the whole thing was again created in phases. So if I show you the trailer goes on for like 3.5 minutes, so I'll probably cut it halfway through. But just to give you an idea, in the game, obviously they've got lovely artists, but fundamentally they're using exactly the same thing. When this mouse moves across the screen, it's still just an input event. When they click on something, it's still just creating a particle, just like the code I showed you.
All these years I've been waiting for you. You are Jane Lockwood, the daughter of Nathan and Elizabeth Lockwood?
So, I mean, okay, yeah, they have, world-class artists and audio guys, but at the same time, you can look at it and you can, at least I can look at it and I can think, oh yeah, okay, they use this bit of the API to do that, and they use this bit to do that, and, it's dragging and dropping stuff. It's quite a sort of fundamental thing. So kind of, from my point of view, the way in which Phaser opened up the ability for them to just create that quite quickly, because I know that the turnaround on this game was pretty fast. That I just thought, well, yeah, okay, it must be doing something right for them to be able to create stuff like this out of it. And it was nice because they published this up on their site. I was like going through some real grief trying to get Phaser 3 worked on. And I was just hitting huge roadblocks every day, and they published it, and I was like, oh my god, wow, you made this with it? And it kind of almost revalidated all the effort and literally years of hard work that been put into it. But all these games are up on the Phaser website, so sorry, I'll skip that one. There are massive, literally hundreds and hundreds up there for you to play, and they kind of all vary from stuff like you've just seen there to little game jam entries, not to denigrate game jam entries because obviously they can turn into nice apps too. But from the real small, tiny, compact things to the huge, elaborate things, and a whole spectrum in between. And there are a couple of even on this little screenshots you got down there are a couple of well-known brands on there. You can probably was that GoJet is down the bottom, so a bit of CBeebies Love and Num Noms if you've got any little girls, you might know about those. They're kind of collectible things like Shopkins. So a lot of brands using Phaser to make their games, or studios using Phaser to make games for popular brands. Okay, so what on earth is what am I working on? Because Phaser 2 has kind of been out for a while now, a couple of years actually, and I've been working on it relentlessly. But around about sort of 6 months ago, I thought, right, okay, it needs time to. It had grown huge. It had become into this quite large sort of monster almost, and I thought, right, no, I need to. Things are changing. JavaScript was changing, like ES6 was becoming more mainstream. The way people were building apps were changing and games with it, so they were kind of like thinking, well, like, you know, I want to be able to just require a bit of the module, and I want to be able to just use Webpack to package it together without hitting weird global issues. So I kind of had to take it right back and strip the thing out basically, and just start it from like I literally refactored the code base from scratch. So because it had become somewhat of a Frankenstein really. Because in my want to get all these cool things in there, it had just expanded like hugely. So I took it all out, stripped everything out, and just started again. Now, Phaser internally used Pixie, which is like a rendering engine. It's Phaser 2 was built literally on top of what was at the time Pixie 2. And a lot of the API decisions I made when I did that, and this was a few years ago, so a lot of the way Phaser works is directly influenced because I built it on top of Pixie. But I've spent a long time removing it entirely. So we no longer have to kind of worry about really weird, deeply nested inheritance chains. There are lots and lots of components that are going on with just a single sprite. So you might be able to just type in add.sprite, but underneath I'm creating a sprite, I'm creating a display object container, I'm splitting a display object, they've got like points in them, they've got text. There's a huge package that comes with it. And it was becoming a maintenance nightmare. So I just thought, right, okay, no, it's time to just strip this back. So Pixie was removed completely. So I basically I rewrote the lot of it, the whole lot. So there's only literally, I think, 2 classes left from the entire thing. All the inheritance chain has gone completely. So you create a single object now, and it has a couple of components. I use proper namespacing now. So you actually have to kind of like, you actually have to understand where a thing lives now. Originally, when I think there was a website last year, they basically published up this what looked like a hierarchical tree of popular JavaScript packages showing how the classes broke down. And you know, most things were like quite beautiful because they were all sort of separated out. And Phaser was this huge long line because there was just Phaser Sprite, Phaser Stat. Nothing was like put into sort of sensible sections, although they might be managed, because it was like me kind of like striving to keep it tidy, to say you just type in, oh no, phaser.sprite. I didn't want you to type in lots of stuff before you're creating a sprite. But actually it kind of like bit me on the arse really, and it did create this huge, long, thin namespace, and I thought, no, right, it's time to sort this out, to chop it up. So I did. I also worked a lot on the renderer, so I took Pixie out. You cannot, even Phaser at the moment, you cannot split the renderers out. So if you don't need WebGL at all and you want to get rid of, like, you know, 180k worth of library, you can't do it. It's packaged in there. So I worked a lot on splitting them out. So basically, Canvas and WebGL are entirely separate now. So you can literally say, right, no, just don't even give me the Canvas stuff. Just give me just the WebGL stuff, or vice versa, which cuts your package size down a lot. Game objects, again, they are now much, much more tidier, much more split out. So image is probably quite tiny in there, but basically image is now split out into, so you've got a specific image renderer, so for Canvas and WebGL, so it doesn't need to include any of the WebGL stuff if you don't need it. The factory functions are all split out. Basically, it's just tidy. It's no longer all over the place. Multi-touch, so this is kind of like getting deeper inside of it now. So basically, when the Phaser goes through it, so it works with a display graph, right? So you basically got a whole bunch of sprites, and they all sit in a tree, and it goes from the top and it goes down through all of them, and it renders and renders and renders and renders. And it can batch things together, so if they're kind of using the same texture, then it will basically, it knows that it could draw maybe these like 10 sprites in one go, using just like one draw call. But there were ways to improve that, so I basically went through the whole lot, and we've rewritten it so that you can now get, if you on a powerful enough GPU, you can now render an entire game in a single draw call, which doesn't sound very fun, but believe me, it makes a huge difference on mobile phones getting hot in your hand. There's a brand new texture manager, so textures are all batched up. There's a Atlas support. You can now have sprite sheets and fonts embedded in texture. Atlas is something that wasn't really possible before without hacking around the loader. compressed API support. So these are things that if you've used it in earnest, you'll think, oh god, at last. And if you've never used it before, you'll kind of like think, oh, what on earth's that? But when you come to use it, you'll be grateful that it's there, even though you might not appreciate why. There's a lot more work to do on it though. I've been working on it solidly for a good few months and months now. But it's kind of at that point now where I can now start creating nice, fun things with it myself. And so I'm looking at a public release for Christmas, this Christmas. So yeah, and as soon as I just, yeah, people are going to get it and just rip it to pieces. I know as soon as I put it out there, but I'm still going to get it out soon. Open source, it's always been open source. I released it under MIT license. I always wanted it to be open source, A, because people help with it, and B, because it's the nature of the web, isn't it? It's closed source and the web don't really go together very well. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but in a good sense, but it's gone mental. It's gone absolutely batshit crazy. So we're now currently up to like 13,500 stars on GitHub. I mean, they don't quite, unfortunately, don't make quite much money, but it's just a kind of like a sort of popularity indicator, I guess, in a way. It's like literally the highest rated JavaScript game, well, the highest rated game framework full stop on GitHub at the moment. These are just like page views just on the site over the last couple of months. So it's phenomenally popular. There's a lot of people on there at any one time, like literally, a million people just on there constantly looking at the documentation, looking at the examples, reading the news. But as a side effect of that, this is my inbox from this morning. So I literally deal with this every single day, and you probably can't read it because it's tiny, but it's like the yellow tagged items are GitHub issues or pull requests or things come from that. The purple tagged items are forum posts, things needing my attention. There is discuss things that need moderating. There's Slack notifications. Oh my god, it's endless. So literally, and so, but I have to. If I don't deal with this, then I don't really understand what it is that's going on in the community. And if I don't understand what's going on in the community, I don't know how to direct Phaser to make it what they need it to be. So I have to spend time on this. But just to warn you now, if you ever create an open source project, or if you have that gets as popular as this is just what you wake up to every day. And it doesn't end there. This was one of my emails. I subscribe to es.next news because it's a great little newsletter. It was like, oh yeah, the new package manager. For fuck's sake, another package manager. So now everyone's going to want me to support another package manager. It's like, what are the scripts? And I was like, oh, I don't know, I haven't even installed it yet. So you kind of have to, sustaining Webpack for the future. I don't know, I didn't use it in the past, not mind the future. So you've got a lot of, all of this needs to be kept on top of. And you've got all of the web APIs changing as well, and all of the support stuff as well. So quite frankly, it explains why I don't get to bed until like 5 in the morning. But it's only, quite honestly, it's only made possible because I have some really great Patreon backers that subscribe, or they pledge monthly to support me. The shop on the site sells plugins and books, and I kind of have affiliate deals with other companies that sell Phaser-related products and videos. And the money that comes from that quite literally, directly funds the time I can spend on it, which is quite a substantial amount of time. I can dedicate probably about 80% of my month to Phaser stuff at the moment, so it's good. And Christmas is always a good time of the year because people spend more, so it kind of like funds me into the new year, as it were. And also client work as well. So I do a lot of client work as well, so creating Phaser games for organizations, and that helps in the sense that it allows me to keep Phaser battle tested under my own conditions, because I know if something's not working right if I've encountered it or making a game with it. And at the same time, the money funds the difference between what this does. So, is it worth it? Yes, it is worth it. Is it a full-time job? Yes, it's a full-time job. I create games for fun games, so I've actually just created games full stop, it's half bloody work. But don't give up. There's a massive, massive community out there. Like if you sit down and you try it and you think, oh man, this is just hard, just ask someone. Go onto the Phaser Slack channel, or like, I'll just say that, oh, please have a look at this. I just can't get my head around this bit. And there's someone says, oh yeah, there's probably some hidden functions of API somewhere you haven't looked at yet. And that will help you get through to the bit that you need. So use the community, use it for feedback. Use it to get feedback on your games. Use it to give feedback on other people's games and code. And don't forget that no one will ever create something in the same way that you're going to do it. So if you are to do try making a game, because no one else will ever make a game in the way in which you do, which may be a good or a bad thing, who knows? But it's got to be something that's worth trying. So give it a go. HTML5 Game Devs is a forum that I run because I have so much free time, and it's great. It's a great forum, and there are loads and loads of people on there. It's the official home of Pixie and Phaser and Babylon and a few other big frameworks, game frameworks. So yeah, absolutely register, sign up, post stuff, lurk, do what you want, but definitely take advantage of it. And that's pretty much the end of it. You can find everything you need on the website. So Phaser is the main website. There's tutorials on there. There are lots and lots of tutorials. I didn't want to go too far into making a game in this presentation because it can just get too bogged down in it, but there are masses of videos and a whole entire YouTube series on how to make a game from start to end in TypeScript or JavaScript, whatever you want. There's blog posts, there are books, there's loads of stuff on there. There's all these different versions of Phaser going right back to sort of April 2013. And there's the newsletter as well, so you can subscribe to that, and I publish that every Friday, and it contains kind of like a summary of all of the games and tutorials that have been published on the site that week. So it's a good way to kind of get stuff thrown at you rather than having to go and hunt for it yourself. But basically, yeah, that's it. You can follow me on Twitter if you're desperate, but otherwise, that's fine. And there you go. If you've got any questions, feel free.